Hey everyone, Master McMaster here. Today's episode is about sexual assault and sexual violence. Viewer discretion advised. Oh wait, no, this isn't a TV show. Listener discretion advised. Thanks.
BrainStorm. BrainStorm 9000.
Greetings and welcome to another episode of BrainStorm 9000.
Exactly.
You just heard Dr. Schultz.
With his infinite wisdom. But today we have a different person to share wisdom and experience with us.
Yeah, so following up on last week's discussion about the stigma of reporting sexual assault, we had the opportunity to speak with a sexual assault survivor, if you will. Kayla, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Kayla. I'm a law student here in New York. I'm from Maryland, and I'm a 2L, so I just started. I have 1 year left.
Ooh,
So you are going to sue people or you are going to defend people? What is-
Defend people is the goal.
You really want to be a trial lawyer?
Yeah, I want to be a public defender
Oh,
for
man.
criminal court. In Brooklyn.
someone's gotta.
It's important work.
Yes, of course.
Are you
No,
gonna be
sure.
like Alexandra Cabot on SVU?
No, because she's like a prosecutor lady, right? Am I thinking of the wrong side?
Oh, that's right. She's not a public. She's the prosecutor for the state.
Yeah.
People versus
Yeah,
rapist one.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I would
It's a
be
good show.
sadly defending the rapist.
Okay, you know what? They need lawyers too.
It's awful work and very hard work. But my thought process is if I was to do something or be accused of something, and God knows I'm poor, I feel like I deserve and am entitled to representation.
Yes,
So
everybody is.
If I want that for myself, I have to kind of put that effort where I think it is due and make sure that
Yeah.
everyone has.
You
that
essentially
opportunity.
either have this when everybody gets fair representation, or you have Nazi Germany and Communist Soviet Union.
And I think
Yeah.
I'd prefer this.
Yes,
Yes,
Maybe.
this sounds much
you're
better.
fighting the good fight. I love it. So,
We invited you because you not only graciously, I think basically heroically, and I mean it, decided to share your story with us.
That's very nice of you to say.
And I think that all three of us feel here that it's going to be of a huge service to public to hear a first hand, so to speak, report of how things happen and how awful it is.
yes. So,
So what happened?
on
actually?
that somber note, yeah, would you tell us a little bit about your experience with sexual assault?
Sure. So when I was in undergrad, I'm gonna say maybe my freshman or sophomore year, I can't remember specifically. My mock trial team had a Christmas party and only invited members of the team. So I was really comfortable. I was with my friends, my best friends, really. And a lot of them are still my best friends. And one of them in particular we had gotten very close to. We had had like something close to a relationship. We had slept together a few times in the past. And throughout the night, because I was with all my friends, I was like, oh, I'm going to drink literally as much as I want with no fear because I'm with people that I trust and who I think trust me and love me and won't let anything happen to me. And throughout the night, I drank a bunch. I was hanging out and then pretty much blacked out. The next morning I woke up, I thought everything was fine. And a few days later, my best friend who had been there sent me a text saying, hey, are you okay? I said, why wouldn't I be okay? We just had a great party. Like, I'm just home hanging out. And he said, well, you wouldn't stop crying. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about at all. So he called me and like he was more upset than I was. We were talking and he was like, do you know what this means, right? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, well, if you don't remember any of it, that means I raped you. And it was really terrible. And I
Whoa.
was like, I'm sure you didn't mean to. And there was just a lot of silence on the phone and him just kind of being like, this is really terrible. And me being like, I don't know what's going on. And then we stopped talking. And over the next few weeks, some of those snapshots kind of came back. You know how like when you black out or you brown out at a party and like a month later you're like, oh, fuck, I jumped on that table or whatever. So
Yeah.
like little snapshots started to come back. And I didn't really talk to him. And then we talked again at some point. And I had asked him like, what made you think I was coherent enough to do anything with? And I think I blocked out a lot of this conversation, but at one point he said, well, your eyes were open, so I thought that was fine.
That's a good indication.
Right.
Yeah.
He said, well,
that's what consent means.
Exactly. Like, I was staring off into space, so that means you can do whatever you want to a person. And then he made an offhand comment about, like, well, I didn't use certain parts of my body for lots of reasons. And I was like, so if you know that there might be some sort of boundary to doing something, why would you do anything? And it was a huge thing. And it was really hurtful for me because we were best friends, and I had done a lot of work through college on consent, on sexual assault, on domestic violence, interpersonal violence, and I talked about it all the time. So it's not like he was some, yokel who didn't know what consent was, or who didn't understand affirmative consent, and, like someone who really wants to do something. It's not like he didn't understand those concepts.
Yeah.
So it was really upsetting to me that I would hear that. And then someone finally started posting all the pictures from that party, not like on the internet, like in our group chat, being like, hey, look how funny these are, like all the Snapchats that were sent. And you could see certain pictures where he's like kind of holding me off in a corner. And there's one where I'm like basically passed it on the floor and he's got his arms around me. And everyone else in the room was just kind of like, well, we knew that you guys were really, really close, so no one thought anything of it. And my friend whose house we were staying at had said, yeah, we put you and him together because we knew that, like, he would take care of you. So it was like he took advantage of not just me, but everyone and the entire situation to do something that he knew he would get away with. At least that's my understanding of the events. I haven't talked to him. I pulled him aside one day and was like, you've got to stop being weird because we're on the same mock trial team and people see us interacting and you're making it weird for everyone. So stop staring at me and being a fucking weirdo. And that was like the last time I spoke to him. So that's my experience with the actual assault. Do you want me to talk about what I did after?
Yes.
Yeah,
or didn't do.
Did you report it?
So I soft reported it is how I kind of like to think about it. My school had a separate entity called Voices Against Violence that was later, I don't know if it was like defunded or they just got rid of it or I maybe didn't think it was that important and they just didn't have it. But it was essentially a support group that you could go to and you would tell someone, hey, this happened to me on campus or this happened to me by someone who goes here. And they would kind of handle it to the degree that you wanted it to be handled. So if you wanted to go to the police, they would help you through that. If you wanted to just report it to the university, they would help you through that. Like, they really stressed not judging how you wanted to move forward, but that they would help you with whatever you wanted to move forward with. So I went to them because I knew the woman in charge, and I really loved her. She was very sweet. And I told her my story. I told her what happened, and they had to clarify a lot of liability stuff. Did it happen on campus? And it didn't. It happened off campus, so that kind of changed their liability a little bit. And then she'd ask, like, well, what do you want to do? Because I think it had been at least a week later, I think. And she was like, well, do you want to, it's too late to do some sort of like kit. And I was like, I don't want to do that anyway. So I didn't go to the police, but I told her and I'd said, like, I think I remember just saying, I just want someone to talk to him because I can't do it, but I want him to be scolded. Like, I just want someone to tell him what you did is wrong. Don't do it again. And here's why it was wrong, essentially. And she told me that they would kind of do that. And I don't really know what happened after. I don't know who spoke to him. I don't know what they said to him. I just know that he didn't talk to me at all. Like, I think I, out of like morbid curiosity, had texted him one day just to be like, what the fuck was going through your mind at all, looking for some sort of closure. And he just didn't answer me. So maybe he was told not to talk to me, or like maybe he just didn't feel comfortable. I don't know. I was not in his brain or couldn't understand what his thoughts were at all.
Why didn't you report it to the police?
I mostly just didn't want to complicate my life any further.
Yeah.
We were on the same mock trial team, so we had to work together. And I had compartmentalized my mock trial life from my personal life, where I was like, I hate him a lot, and seeing him makes me feel awful, and I don't like it. But he's a good witness, and we need him on the team. So wow. I didn't tell the e-board. I didn't really tell any of them. It wasn't until like maybe a month later that I told them, but just out of like, these are my friends and they should know something awful happened to me. It wasn't like, I want him off the team. Because they asked, they were decent people, and they were like, hey, we don't care if he's a good witness. If he did something awful to you, we will remove him. And I was like, no, we need him. So don't do that. I didn't want to be responsible for that. I didn't want to make my life any harder. And I didn't want to have to deal with any sort of backlash with, oh, well, she couldn't prioritize the team. Like, she had to put herself first.
Right.
And I don't think anyone would have actually felt that way, but I thought they might. And I didn't even want to deal with the possibility of that happening.
But wasn't it very, to say it very, very mildly, awkward and weird
Oh, yeah.
to see somebody who assaulted you?
100%. It was super weird all the time. But I'm so dedicated to that stupid sport that, like, I would just kind of push it out of my mind.
The stupid sport of lawyership?
Yeah. I know it's really dorky, and it's like, it's my life, and that's, like, why I went to law school. So because it mattered so much to me, I just didn't want to cause any more ripples in it than there already were. And it was awkward where it got to a point where we couldn't be in the same trial room because people knew. And then it was like,
Right.
well, make sure that he's not close to Kayla, or like make sure Kayla's okay. And I never made them think I wouldn't be okay. You know, like I was never like breaking down crying, and I wasn't able to perform if he was in the room. Like it didn't affect my performance at all. To the
Well,
best of my knowledge, it didn't.
there is a
affect my
very big caveat that you and I know about, and we are failing to mention it. So 3 months later,
You want me to talk about it?
well, of course,
Okay.
if you are comfortable.
Yeah, so a few months after that, I had attempted my first suicide attempt. And a lot of people thought that it was because of that, or that had played a big part in it.
You don't think so?
I don't really know. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, because I think I had a lot of opportunities to turn that trauma into really effective ways of healing, where I use it in storytelling, I use it in writing, I use it when I worked with the Women's Center on campus, I use it in advocacy. So if anything, I kind of turned that trauma into something more productive, which I think was really helpful for my healing. But I was having a lot of issues in general. I have bipolar disorder, and I wasn't medicated. I just ended like a really serious relationship. There was a lot of things wrong that all kind of piled on. So I think you could argue that my sexual assault definitely played a role in kind of me, once I did try to commit suicide, feeling the way that I did enough to kind of just be like, all right, fuck it, I'm checking out.
So, you know, both Master McMaster and I like a series of movies that are called Kill Bill.
Yes.
And in this movie, if our listeners don't remember, she kind of wakes up from a coma to learn that a guy who was taking care of her actually has a tendency to bring men who pay him like $50 so they can have sex with a person in a coma.
Mm-hmm.
She winds up hurting, if not killing, the person who
No,
attempts
she
to hurt her.
murders that dude.
It was
Yeah.
very
Right.
gratifying
Murders
to
that dude.
watch.
It was
Right.
great.
So, even when people are in a coma, nobody can tell you what they do or don't know. Because a lot of material, so to speak, from our life gets stored somewhere in our brain. Let's call it subconsciousness. Subconsciousness means we don't have an immediate access. And no one, literally no one, even Sigmund Freud, who spoke about it, knew and knows how easy or difficult it is to access this material when things pile up. So if I had to choose between saying yes, it contributed, and no, it didn't, I would say yes, it did.
That's fair.
Because all it takes is this last drop for something to break. And human psyche is very sensitive, that we know for sure, very fine instrument. And if somebody comes and starts playing this instrument without your consent and hurting the instrument, sooner or later it's going to give and something terrible is going to happen. Right? Makes sense.
It does.
Well, I've been able to identify how the trauma in itself affected my interactions with other people and my interactions in my personal relationships. And there are definitely parts that I didn't realize were affected until much later. Like, I used to be a very physical person with everyone that I knew. I was into hugs. I like to link arms with your girlfriends and like share the
Right.
same bed with people. I was always very, very comfortable with human interaction. And it took me, like, Jane hugged me today. It took me years to be able to even like be okay with a side hug. Or like I still don't really like to be touched very much by people unless I'm asked first. Because I want it to be on my own terms, which I think is like very clearly related to being assaulted against your own will. You know, you then want your intimacy to be kind of on your own terms. And people don't really understand that, I think, unless something has happened to them. But that's one of the biggest, I think, reactions I've had, or I think side effects of being assaulted.
It's not a side effect, it's a direct effect, actually, I
Right.
will say.
Right.
How else do you think it's impacted your life?
It's definitely made me question people's, I think, motives when interacting with me, because after it happened, I defended him a lot to a lot of people, where I did a lot of the like, I really don't think he meant to, or like, I really don't think he like thought he was doing something wrong. I don't think throughout the night he knew this was going to happen. And it took one of my closest friends one day being like, okay, but you know he was counting your drinks, right? I was like, well, wait, maybe he was just looking out for me. And it's like, but was he really? Or because he knows how much you should drink and shouldn't drink, and he wasn't stopping you, he was just keeping track, you know? And that's one of the things they teach you when you are looking for red flags. If someone is like feeding you alcohol, if they're counting how many drinks that you've had, that's something you should be looking out for. Weird teaching we do for women for how to avoid being raped, which is crazy bullshit anyway. But
So you teach women?
yeah, that was a big part of the work that I was doing in undergrad, was
Right.
doing advocacy for women and teaching them, like, you know, these are the red flags for what you should be looking out for in certain situations. Like if you go to a party and a guy is feeding you alcohol, that's an issue, or things like that we teach women instead of teaching men. Don't be an asshole and don't rape people. We
Right.
teach women how to avoid being raped.
Well, raping somebody is an act of violence. It's not a sexual event at all. It's a way to assault somebody. And assaulting somebody when they are basically unconscious does exist in real life also, in an, let's say, non-sexual manner. Right?
Right,
Because people kill people when they're asleep, and people hurt people when they're asleep, and God knows what happens. So,
Well, remember, my eyes were open, guys.
right,
According to the record.
Right.
Why do you think you spent so much time defending him to yourself and to other people?
Because we were best friends. You know, I didn't want to think that someone that I had connected with on such like an emotional level for a decent amount of time would do something that awful to me, even though I knew that, like, at the time, I don't know if this statistic is still correct, 80% of assaults are people that you know.
yes, if not more.
And I knew that. You know, like, I was teaching that on a daily basis, and I still didn't want to admit to myself or to other people that someone that I, like, truly deeply cared for, who had been there for me during a really terrible time, would do something like that to me. And I think also because when we had that phone call and he was so distraught, and I was like, oh, of course he didn't mean to. He's a good friend, and that would be terrible. So I think I wanted to protect myself from becoming cynical and not trusting the people in my life who I had built connections with and relationships with. I didn't want to have to come out of this and not trust anyone. I didn't want it to make me cynical. I didn't want it to make me jaded. I didn't want it to make me question all of my personal relationships with all the people I had met under the same circumstances as him. You know, like, I didn't want to then think the rest of my mock trial team would do something awful to me, or who wouldn't care if something awful to me happened. And because we had been friends, I then didn't want to hurt his reputation, weirdly. Like, I was like, he's a good guy. Don't think something awful of him because he did this one awful thing.
And he's an asset to the mock trial team.
Right. You know, it's like when people talk about Brock Turner as a swimmer, right? Like, no, he's
such
shithead.
a promising career ahead
Right.
of him. Don't ruin his career by convicting him of this sexual
And I
assault.
didn't want to do that. When people talked about, you know, why didn't you report him more to the school? You could get him expelled maybe. Well, I didn't want to ruin his academic career. I didn't want him to get kicked out of school. I kept telling myself, it's not worth all of that for this one thing that I've dealt with and that I'm going to therapy for now and whatever.
So in
you
a
know.
sense, you were privileging him and his future over your own maybe well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think I sometimes still do that, where there are still times where when it comes up and people ask me, like, you guys are asking me now, well, why didn't you? You know, what was stopping you from ruining his academic chances or whatever? Like, why does it matter? And I think sometimes I still tell myself, like, well, I'm okay. So, like,
Yeah.
was it worth going to someone for? And I still don't know if I should have or if I did the right thing or did the wrong thing. I think it's an incredibly personal decision.
Yeah.
And I think some people need more of a consequence for stuff that happens to them. And I don't think that anyone in particular is right or wrong. And I don't think that any one person's needs are more correct than any other person's needs. I think it really is a deeply personal decision that's affected by a lot of different things. So who that person is to you, how you'll have to interact with them in the future, if you'll have to interact with them in the future, if their future is tied to yours, any of those things, I think, any number of those things kind of piled on top of each other determine what you might want to do and what's right for you personally as a, quote unquote victim or survivor.
Do you think that part of why you might have initially, assumed that he wasn't trying to hurt you, that, it wasn't his fault or that he didn't do anything wrong is because you didn't want to see yourself as a victim?
I don't think so at first, but I think later it sort of did. Because in the beginning, I remember very vividly just wanting to stay away from the idea that someone that I cared for did something like that to me, or that someone that I thought really cared for me would do something like that. Was my biggest concern for a long time, was like, this person I really care about who claimed they really cared about me did this really awful, terrible thing to me, and
It's
I
like
don't
so violating.
want that. Yeah. And it's like, it feels like a huge betrayal, it wasn't just some dude at a party who like didn't give a shit about me. It was someone who told me over and over again how important I was to them and how much like our relationship mattered to him and how our friendship was important, and someone who I'd been vulnerable with in the past because we'd had sex in the past. So I didn't want to think that all of that was fake, or, that he was taking it for granted, or that I was stupid and I didn't see it and I should have seen it.
Yeah, that would like totally fuck with your worldview.
Right. I thought like, am I just a big dumb idiot who should have seen this coming and I didn't? Like, did other people see this coming and I didn't? Was I too stupid to know that like he was taking advantage of me and I didn't realize it? So I think that was a bigger issue. Later, I think I started to think more about the victim rhetoric of like, people saying like, oh, you're so strong to have survived this awful experience, or you're such it's such an inspiration to see you come out of this as a strong victim. And it's like, that rhetoric might work for some people, I think, but it's the same with like when you tell someone who's depressed, like, oh, you're not alone, there's more people. What the fuck does that mean to me? I don't care if other people have problems. That has nothing to do with me. And I've always kind of felt that way about my sexual assault too, or people, well, there are other victims you can connect with. Well, fuck that. I don't want anyone to be a victim. I don't want it to be me or the next person. And I know that it's helpful for a lot of people to feel that way. But personally for me, it was never helpful. So the victim rhetoric always struck me as like, well, I'm so many other things, I'm not just that.
You know what? Usually in this podcast, Master McMaster plays the devil's advocate. But periodically I take on this role. And in this situation, maybe I'm going to do it again. I heard in many casual conversations during different classes that I've taken throughout my life this type of logic. How can anybody say that a husband raped his wife of 20 years? How can anybody say that somebody who's had consensual sex with a particular person before raped this person on yet another occasion? So maybe you two could talk about it. I doubt that people who have this type of logic listen to this podcast. But in case they do, or in case somebody wants to take it and say, see, look, that's what people think, right?
Right.
Maybe you want to talk about it.
Like, you can be consensually kissing someone or engaging in some kind of sexual contact with someone
And at one point, if you feel uncomfortable and you don't want to stop, just because you had already been doing it doesn't mean that you're consenting to the whole thing.
I think there are a lot of different ways to look at that particular argument.
Let's do it.
Because you definitely hear it a lot.
Yes.
Like, especially when someone is married or in a
Yes.
relationship.
Yes.
A lot of people, like, well, they're your partner. Or, like, you guys have had sex before. What's the big deal? I don't understand. Of course they thought they could. I think a lot of people look at sex and look at past relationships. They give them a sense of entitlement. Especially if someone is in a relationship. They think, like, well, why wouldn't I be able to? There's, like, no reason for me not to. In my particular instance, he wasn't my boyfriend, right? Like, we were very, very close friends. We had had sex in the past. But there was never any sort of understanding between the two of us. You know, like, there was never some sort of, like, oh, every time we're together, like, this is what we do.
And I don't think there ever is with a
Yeah,
couple.
not really. I don't think so.
I totally agree with you, but I know that a lot of people, that's
right,
why I'm
think
bringing
the
it up,
opposite of that.
think exactly the opposite. Right?
Well, and I'd had people who said that to me, actually, where they were like, well, maybe he thought it was okay because you guys had sex in the past. I'm sure he did think it was okay, but that doesn't mean that he was correct. I think just because you've had sex with someone ever doesn't mean that you are entitled to their body in the future.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely.
So even if he did think, well, we've had sex before and she liked it then, clearly I can have sex with her now, even if she won't like it. Because I couldn't have been a, like, enthusiastic partner in
Yeah,
that
he
scenario.
Fully admitted that you were crying.
Right. Like, I couldn't have been, like, this is definitely what I'm into. There was no clear and enthusiastic yes from me, which there should be every time you have sex with someone. There should be clear and enthusiastic yeses consistently.
So, since I assigned myself a few episodes ago as our dedicated time machine, because I'm older, I can tell you myself and as any other married man, we've heard a lot of jokes from people who've been married for many years that sometimes sex doesn't happen for an extended period of time in their life. And I think it happens before when people live together for a long time. They learn to respect each other. And if somebody says, any of the parties says, no, I'm too tired, I don't want to, for whatever reason, people don't make a big deal out of it because it's a part of human life. After all, with all the strings attached of how important and beautiful it is, it's just another human activity to which a person, first of all, needs to be ready
Right.
and needs to consent, like want to do it. And because it takes two, usually, to have sex, right?
At least.
Right, so let's say at least. Everybody who participates need to do it on the consensual basis because otherwise it's rape, right? Of course.
Yeah.
So from where I sit and stand and live, of course, rape is possible in any relationship, including a committed official relationship. And you agree, right? So people shouldn't even like question this kind of stuff because it's very obvious. Like, let's go out and have pizza. No, but we had pizza last week. I'm on a diet.
Right.
Okay.
Or I just don't want to. Like today,
But
I
you
just
love
don't want
pizza.
pizza.
Well,
Right.
not to want pizza is kind of difficult. Or, for example, let's go out and have a drink. No, I'm not going to have a drink because I'm driving. Like, these are simple, very, very simple concepts, right?
When people don't feel entitled to pizza and drinks, they feel entitled to sex. Especially, I think, when we talk to certain types of men, where they feel entitled to not just sex, but to women's bodies, whether it's for sexual pleasure or not. They
Right.
just think that they should be allowed to for this, that, or the other reason, especially in situations where you do know each other or you have been intimate in the past. They just think, like, I'm allowed to do this.
So this whole thing about the idea that a lot of men feel entitled to women's bodies and this idea of a lot of women like privileging the reputation, for example, of their assaulter over their own well-being. Do you think that there is a cultural stigma against sexual assault? Do you think there are cultural factors that play into why people approach it this way?
I think so. I think we are kind of women especially, and like we're speaking in a binary right now. Like we're leaving out a lot of people when we talk about this. But women, especially cis women, I think are socialized to protect the men around them.
Yeah.
Like we think about our fathers and like the people that we see as superiors, or even like people that are close to us. I think we're socialized to kind of make them look good or like put them in a good light.
And just like put other people before yourself in general.
Definitely, especially when you've been socialized to kind of humble yourself or to be more subdued than the people around you. It's easy to then expect a woman who's been assaulted to prioritize someone else's reputation or someone else's livelihood over their own health. And it's easy, I think, to socialize women to think that, like, well, you were just assaulted. It only happened once. This is the rest of their life.
Right.
You know, and that's tone deaf because
like,
you've been assaulted. That's the rest of your fucking life too. Like, you have to deal with that just as much as they do. But
Well, speaking in binary or not, of course, it's very clear to everybody that in the gay and lesbian community and all other different types of human activities, rape happens all the time.
Absolutely.
And not less. And I don't know whether there are any stats. We don't even need to talk about less or more, but it happens all the time because people force themselves on other people in any type of relationship.
Yeah.
So it cuts across all the cultural strata.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think are some of the main reasons that people don't report sexual assault?
I think aside from protecting our assaulters, which we've already talked about, besides that, and besides like kind of what I've touched on my own issues with kind of not wanting to complicate my life any further.
Yeah.
Which I think a lot of people can sympathize with.
Yeah, you go to the police, you have to answer questions, you have people digging into your past, you have people questioning you.
Right. Well, that's what I was gonna kind of say was it re-traumatizes you to have to go through the entire process. You know, like think about steps 1 to 10 when someone has been raped, right? If whether it's someone they know or whether it's a stranger or whatever your circumstances might be, the textbook, what people want you to do is immediately go to the hospital, right? So that means not showering, not changing your clothes, whatever those things may be, which in itself is traumatizing. You want to get as far away from that experience as you can. I still remember the outfit I was wearing when I was raped, and I have not worn it since. I haven't touched that t-shirt. I think I used it as a cleaning rag once, as some type of like cathartic fuck you type of thing. But like you don't want to be in those clothes anymore. But that's step 1, right? Is you make sure that you're still wearing the same clothes. You don't shower, right? So you don't get to wash off any of what might be on your body, or like even just the catharsis of taking a shower you shouldn't do yet because you know that you want there to be as much evidence as possible. So then you go to the police, right? And you might have to deal with some asshole cop who, well, what were you wearing? What did you say? Did you look like you were saying yes? Did he think you were saying yes? Have you had sex before? Just like what
were
can
you drinking?
Right. Were you drunk? How much did you have to drink? Was he drunk? Did he know you were drinking? There are so many things that you might not have been able to process yet, things you might not have an answer to yet, or things that are going to be triggering, just like in theory, are already going to be kind of triggering and fucked up for you to have to deal with. So then after that, you go and you might do a rape kit. So you have to sit there and you have to have, if you have any marks on your body, they might have to take pictures of you. They're going to take your clothes maybe. They might have to do an invasive test on your genitals, which you don't want touched probably after something like that has happened to you.
Nope.
And that's only like the first few steps, right? Because then you might have to prepare a real statement. You might have to get a lawyer. You might have to go to court. You might have to testify against your abuser. There are so many things that you might have to do that are so traumatizing and so triggering over and over and over and over again. And you're expected to do it, you know, to put your rapist behind bars, hopefully. And then that might not even happen because the justice system doesn't really care about victims of sexual assault. And I use the word victim, you know, just for the sake of not really having other words to use sometimes.
It's difficult.
Right. It's just there's so many things that go into being assaulted or that go into reporting your assault that can be so re-traumatizing over and over again. And people just don't want to have to go through that. they just don't want to do it. And some people might feel like they can do that, and that's fucking awesome. And those people are like way stronger than I will ever be. But some people just don't feel the need to do that. Some people think that not only will it complicate their lives, but they just don't want to have to put up with it or deal with it. And I think those are valid too. I think, like, when I told my mom that I'd been assaulted, she was really, really upset. And in a moment of like, what was very clearly just her being upset that something had happened to her daughter, she had said, when I told her I didn't report it, like, well, if he does that to someone else, you're going to feel terrible.
Yeah.
Which is true. That is very accurate. But I think it's a fucked up thing to put that responsibility on yourself.
Absolutely.
And I don't think anyone should put it on anyone who's been assaulted, because it's not your fault that someone is terrible.
And that's also, I think, like, maybe part of, like, the cultural fucked-up-ed-ness of how we view these situations. Everyone talks about it's your responsibility to protect yourself from a sexual predator. It's your responsibility to report them so that they don't do it to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
It all assumes or perpetuates the idea that they don't have control over their own actions,
right,
or that they don't need to.
Well, that's the hashtag boys will be boys,
Yep.
It's like, of course he's not thinking about it. You have to be the one to stop him. That's why you're not supposed to wear a short skirt, because
You
they're
don't want to
gonna-
trigger a boy.
oh my God, their brains are going to shut down and they can't stop themselves. Like,
Yeah, no, I was talking about before how when I was in grade school, I was sent home once for wearing a tank top, for wearing like a spaghetti strap,
right.
because
Your shoulders are distracting.
it was distracting the boys from their education.
Get it together, Jane.
Talk about distracting me from
Right.
my education by pointing out that, first of all, I can be a sexual object,
Right.
and implying that their education is more important than
Right.
mine, and blah, 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 blah.
Right. Well, that's like perpetrating rape culture as early on as possible as grade school. Like, we tell children you can't wear a spaghetti strap because your body is inherently sexual.
Yeah.
And that's going to distract all of the people around you from their education. Your education doesn't matter. Fuck you and your schooling. We're going to send you home regardless, because you're not a future leader of the world. The boy sitting behind you who gets a fucking boner because he can see your shoulder blades
Jesus Christ.
is the guy that matters, apparently. But yeah, and that's, all of these things go together, because that's what our rape culture looks like. Is it starts as young as infants, when we see like the onesies we put infants in, where like the boy ones are like chick magnet and the girl ones are like, I'm not allowed to date till I'm married. Like, we sexualize newborns.
Daddy's girl.
Exactly. Or like, it's just, we do it as soon as you're born, and then
And not on purpose.
we blame you
even.
for it later.
Yeah. It's just like...
It's
just,
so deeply ingrained
yeah.
in our society, and it's such a big cultural change that needs to happen. And we're starting to see a little bit of that with like Me Too and Time's Up, and some of it is great and some of it is not so great. Like, I think we all have opinions on like how effective those things can be in culture changes. So it's an important conversation to have right now, especially because we're seeing all of these people who are coming forward about being assaulted by a prominent figure, and we have prominent figures who are actually being held accountable for doing terrible things. And all of that is great, but I think the biggest issue is if it's going to trickle down at all, because these are
Right.
big people in Hollywood. These are big names. Like, these are celebrities who are talking about it. But are we talking about blue collar people who are being assaulted by their bosses? Or are we talking about in academia, like when a professor is assaulting students, or even just like in normal day-to-day normal people jobs
Yeah.
when that's happening?
That topic has been broached in some of the discussion surrounding the person who assaulted me, because he owns a lot of restaurants in Seattle.
Right.
And in his case, so he hasn't been brought to justice, so to speak. He hasn't had any charges filed against him, even though people have tried to. He's not been indicted for anything, but culturally there has been a backlash, and his restaurants have been boycotted, and he's been, I guess, persuaded to
Right.
sell his steaks in all these restaurants. No one wants to be associated with him. But some of the conversation about it in an article that came out recently has been, well, would people care about this if he weren't a prominent figure in the
Right.
community? Would anyone pay attention to it?
Right.
And not only that, but like, would anyone care if it was just one person that came forward
Right.
instead of 11 people?
Right.
Like, would anyone even pay attention to it?
And I think that's one of the things that we look at when it's like small time, in quotes or whatever, perpetrators or people who've only assaulted one person versus serial assaulters or people who've assaulted a lot of people over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Is people are concerned about like, well, who are we punishing? Do we
Yeah.
want to punish, these people over here, which
And
I think is
they don't say
bullshit.
that about
It should be
murderers.
everyone, right? Like you want to.
You only killed
You
one
only killed
person.
one. How bad could it be? I'm sure you didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Like some of the way that we talk about sexual assault and the way that we talk about victims of sexual assault, it's always easier to demonize someone who has assaulted lots and lots and lots of people because that seems egregious to us, right? Like we think about larger crimes, like look at all these people who are affected. It's harder, I think, for a lot of people to empathize with just one person, especially if they see it as something that's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that too, because that was one of the things that you said about, especially like one of the reasons why you didn't really like hard report it. You
Right.
said you
Soft
made a
report.
soft report, but
Right.
you didn't really report it because you're like, I'm fine. I'm
Right.
dealing with it. It's not that big a deal. And I had the exact same reaction. I was like,
Right.
I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like, my life is okay. It doesn't traumatize me every single day.
Right.
Not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck do you think is going on there? That we always tell ourselves that it's not a big deal. Like, what would be a big deal? What qualifies as a big deal?
Well, I think some women, I think we are good at maybe not healing, but good at kind of saying like, okay, well, I've taken the steps I need to take to deal with what has happened to me, right? Like I took my assault and I turned that trauma into what I think are really beautiful things. I became an advocate. I became a shoulder to cry on for a lot of people. I became a face of healing for a lot of people. And for me, that was great. And I was able to tie that into even my religion where I was like, this really awful thing happened to me. But like now I'm in a place where, God has given me the opportunity to be something for some people.
Mhm.
And I wasn't able to do that before. And that's really great for me. But that's so deeply personal, where like I did what I needed to do to heal. But if the person next to me had the same thing had happened to them, but they needed to go to the police to feel better and feel closure, I would never tell them like, well, I didn't have to do it, so why should you?
Yeah.
I think we should be looking at it on a person-to-person level. Because there are people, like, if you listen to some of, like, certain true crime stories, or if you watch I Survived or any of those things, these women who are, like, brutally raped and, like, get their arms cut off and, like,
Oh
all
my
those...
god, I hate that episode.
Is the best
I know the
episode.
story you're talking about.
Yes.
It's so fucked
It's
up.
so deeply upsetting. And when stuff like that happens to people, and then you even hear those victims talk about it, and they're like, I'm great. And you're like, fuck, how? How did you do that,
Yeah.
Letting
Well, and
people
also,
do
like,
what works for them.
I don't know. I mean, so like you said, like I'm okay. I don't
Right.
need to report it. Like I'm
Right.
fine. Are you really fine?
Yeah, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
And because I've been in therapy for so long, my wonderful, beautiful therapist who I speak to very fondly about these things, when I do that, they're like, well, I'm fine. She goes, okay, well, let's stop there. No, because you were assaulted or because this thing happened to you. Like, it's
like
you're not fine.
You're minimizing it.
Right. And it's okay to not be fine is, I think, something that a lot of women struggle with, where, like, we don't want to give, at least for me, don't want to give someone the power to make us not fine.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of women struggle with, where, like, we don't want to give this dude or whoever, this sexual predator, the power over us, because it's not a sexual thing, right? It is about power and control. We don't want them to have even more power over us than they already do, because they did this
Right.
awful thing to you. But now they're the ones controlling whether or not you're okay, or whether or not you can have sex again, whether you can enter into a relationship again. We feel like they have so much power over us in so many aspects of our lives, where I think a lot of us are very quick to diagnose ourselves as fine after, because we
Yeah.
don't want to deal with the idea that we might not be because of what someone did to us.
Yeah.
Or at least
Um,
that's how I felt.
No, I think you're so right there. So before you were talking about your advocacy work, so you worked with Take Back the Night, right?
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So it's a rally / protest that's done all over the country on college campuses. I went to University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I was one of the leads for Take Back the Night for I think 3 years.
Was that even before you were
Yeah, I
assaulted?
started working with them doing it before I was assaulted. And then after I was assaulted, it was like, hey, guess what, guys? I have even more authority to work on this
Yep,
now.
now I have
Isn't
a story.
that fun and exciting?
Mhm.
So my work with them, for those who are unfamiliar with like the process for Take Back the Night, you start with, at least at UMBC, you start with a speak out. So like me being an MC, I started by telling my story. So I would, very intimately tell a crowd of 250 people about my rape into a microphone, and it was great.
No big deal.
No big deal. So I would tell my story, and then the other MC would tell their story, and then we would open up the speak out to anyone. So we would just like walk away from the microphone and let people come up at their leisure and talk. And we had a set amount of time that we had open for people to just come up, and it was so deeply moving and like world shaking to see these people, because we had people come up and talk about, we had sorority girls talking about it like you would kind of expect, because that's kind of the culture. But you would have people come up and talk about family members, their friends, about teachers. Sometimes like they would just come up and share these really haunting, beautiful stories, and they would all end with like, and I'm still recovering, or and I feel great. So there was never any pressure to be one or the other.
Yeah.
And then after the speak out, we had like signs, and we would do a big protest around the school, and I had a megaphone. I don't know why anyone would give me a megaphone, but it was great. And we had like chants, and it was really beautiful, and they had all the survivors, in air quotes, at the front. So and you didn't have to stand there, but it was like self-identified survivors or victims, or however you wanted to call yourself, were at the front, and you really reclaimed your space. And it was nice to do on a college campus, because a lot of us had been assaulted either on campus or by classmates. So
Yeah.
it's like, we're taking back the night, So we walk across campus, we would come back, and then I don't know if it's unique to UMBC, but we did kind of healing through art afterwards, where we would set up like craft places to like scrapbook if you wanted to, or like
That's
do cool
awesome.
artsy shit. But then we also had like booths where you could go talk to campus counselors after, because it could be really traumatizing and really triggering to have to kind of listen to all those stories, or like even if you didn't share, to think about your own story deeply, maybe if you hadn't thought about it before.
Mm-hmm.
It was a really, really great thing that we did every year. It still goes on. We have like t-shirts. I'm on a button. Like it's really,
You're
really...
on a button?
I'm on a t-shirt. It's the coolest thing in the world.
I want a Kayla t-shirt.
I will get you one. But I am like, it's really, really cool. But there's flyers and pins and t-shirts and stuff, and it's all very centered around, we see you, we believe you, and we're here for you. And that's the general mood, is like, we are not going to be the people to ask you what you are wearing, or if your shirt was rape, or, question you at all. We're like, we believe you. Whatever you get up there and tell us, we are not going to question you. We are not going to look at you like some type of like wounded baby. We believe you, and you are strong, and we're here for you, and it's great. And I did that work for a few years, and turning my trauma into that was really, really rewarding for me. And my supervisors there were amazing, and like such great people. And there was I never felt like, oh, this is weird, or like I shouldn't be talking about this, or like, is my story as valid as other people?
Yeah.
Like, it never felt that way. It just felt like we were giving a space to talk to people who needed it.
Everything that you're saying about this movement,
Sure.
everything that you're saying about Take Back the Night sounds like really amazing steps towards tearing back the stigma
Right.
and the power of the stigma, because
And that's
instead
the
of
goal.
being afraid
Yeah.
and being embarrassed
Yeah.
and being ashamed, you're putting yourself out there and saying, this happened.
Yep.
And it's okay. I'm
And
not going to be silent.
We held it in a really public place on campus too. Like you couldn't avoid it, really. Where like we held it in the building that everyone went to, where the food was. Like all the offices were there for a lot of departments. Like you had to walk through that area, which we had to talk about, because it was like, if you don't know this is happening and you're a victim and you walk through, that could be kind of triggering to just like randomly, you're on your way to class and you hear someone talking about their assault. That could be bad. But the kind of risk balancing analysis we did for that was like, that's unfortunate and terrible, and if we have to deal with that, we will. But it was more important to us to give a kind of, I guess, opportunity for people to not feel hidden away in like a small room somewhere to talk about their assault. Like you're gonna hear about
it. To be faceless.
Exactly. Like people are gonna see this, and like we had, because it was in such a public space, people who didn't know it was happening would see it and stop and then stay for the whole thing, because they didn't realize it was going on, and then they did, and they were like, oh, this is a beautiful thing that I want to be a part of. So the crowd may not have been huge when it started, but by the time the speak out was over, you could barely walk through to get out of the building. So it really did give people an opportunity to like be a part of a very big movement to kind of take back power, because that's essentially what we're losing when we're assaulted. Is that's what people are trying to take from you, is power and control over your body and over yourself and your mind, and to a larger extent sometimes your future relationships.
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of give everyone the opportunity to go like, fuck that, like I'm gonna be open about this, and I'm gonna have the opportunity to kind of take back that power, was really, really important to my healing. So if you go to a university and they have a Take Back the Night,
plug time,
go to it or volunteer to help or something. Because when I first volunteered to help, I wasn't a victim. Like I just wanted to be a part of this really beautiful thing.
Yeah.
So even though I hadn't been assaulted, I was like, this is great. And then once I was assaulted, I knew that like, okay, well, at least I have this cool opportunity to like be a part of this big thing that's going to help us not feel so shitty about it.
I love that.
It's awesome. It's the coolest. I'll get you a t-shirt.
Yes, please do. Are there any other like resources other than, things like Take Back the Night that you would recommend to people who have experienced any form of sexual violence?
Go see a therapist immediately.
Yeah,
That's
talk about
if you
it.
have the resources and the opportunity and the privilege to be able to do that kind of thing, you should, which is a huge thing. Like not everyone has the privilege to see a therapist, and I'm very privileged to be able to do that.
It ain't cheap.
Right. It's like
and insurance,
pretty expensive.
Yeah.
But like if you can see a counselor of any kind or seeing a therapist or something, that was the most helpful thing for me, because having a support system is great. Like I eventually told my parents, I had best friends who I could talk to about it, and I still talk about it. This happened years ago for me, but like my boyfriend and I still every now and again I'm like, hey, can you like be nice to me today, or like can we have like nicer sex, because I'm feeling a little like insecure, like a little like out of control lately, and I need to take a little bit of that control back, because it does affect you for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
Especially depending on the type of assault that you've endured, so just being able to be open and honest with the people around you and talking about it is so important, because once we rationalize things in our head and we tell ourselves that we're fine, or we don't talk about it, it comes up later, and it's going to keep coming up. And if you don't deal with it in some way, you can't really escape its clutches.
I think that's so accurate.
That's what helped me, at least, I think, was seeing someone and talking, because I didn't want to admit it for a really long time.
Yeah.
Especially because when you see your own experiences somewhere in a gray area, because as much as I would tell people, like, your experience isn't as real as other people's because you were drunk, it's when it happened to me, I was like, oh, but I was drunk, is that really fair? Like, you, such a badass advocate every day, and then when it happens to you, it's so easy to invalidate your own feelings and to talk yourself out of feeling hurt and to convince yourself that you're feeling fine. So, like, kind of going outside of yourself and talking about it, I think, is, like, the number one way to start to dealing with your trauma.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so we know that you are not comforted by people saying,
Right.
"It happened to me too. You're not alone." So for any of our listeners who have experienced some form of sexual violence, what would you like them to know, if anything?
If that rhetoric does work for you, that's a good thing too. No, because I think I'm a little bit on the outlier with feeling that way. But it is important, I think, for a lot of people to know your experience is not so otherworldly that you should feel like no one will understand you or that it's your fault for some reason.
Yeah, that there's something wrong with you.
Right. There's always going to be someone who can sympathize with what has happened to you and who isn't going to judge you and who isn't going to tell you that, you're overreacting or that it didn't happen. Like, I'm not going to gaslight you, Like, there are people out there who will listen to you and will believe you. I think, and if you're not comforted like I am by other people, it has happened to other people, I think what does comfort me and a lot of people is that there are people who believe you. You don't have to think that you're alone in the sense of like, this happened to me and no one is going to believe that it happened or no one is going to believe that I'm hurting because of this thing. People definitely do. And there are people out there who do, and you should talk about it to deal with it. But it's not your fault is a big thing as well. I know that's something that a lot of people struggle with. Yeah, those are, you are believed and that it's not your fault. There's nothing you could do ever that would put you as the responsible person for someone doing something to you or trying to take your power and your control without consent. I think is one of the biggest things to know that it's not your fault. And it never could be.
Fuck the patriarchy.
100%.
All right. Anything else you want to add?
Be kind to people.
Yes.
Just be fucking nice.
Even outside of the realm of sexual assault. Just all the time.
Because things happen to people and life is so goddamn awful.
It can be.
You just never know what people are going through. Because I'm a pretty nice person and sometimes people will say shit to me that I'm like, hey man, that's real triggering or not very nice. And you might not know that you're doing it. So just be kind to people. Understand that you don't know what's going on in their lives ever. And that things can be way harder than you think they are. So just be kind.
Yes. Agree. Thank you so much. The ever wise, ever inspiring.
Very nice of you.
Kayla, thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome. I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Kayla, so much for sharing your story with us and coming in to speak with us today.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
So that concludes this week's episode. Tune in next week for a brand new episode on a brand new topic. And if you have any thoughts, concerns, questions about today's discussion or literally anything else, you can always reach us at info@brainstorm9000.com. And you can also hit us up on all the social medias, on the Twitters and the Instagrams and the Facebooks, all that shit.
And please continue to keep your brain open. At least to our podcast.
Yes, always to our podcast.
BrainStorm 9000, okay?
Goodbye, Earthlings.
Greetings.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of BrainStorm 9000. If you like us, love us, or marginally tolerate us, hey, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever the hell you listen to your podcasts.